Yo, 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 what is up, party people? Welcome to another episode of Thrive and Dive. Thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. And I'm joined here today by a very special friend, Luden. I don't know how to say her last name.
Aquino.
Yeah. Luden Aquino. Luden Aquino is the man. I've known Luden for, I've known of you when you were little. Actually, I remember my parents doing children's ministry, and they remember you as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
So I've seen you
grade?
here. Third grade?
Third grade.
Wow. But in terms of my personal relationship with Luden, I'd say it's really blossomed back in January of this year, 2023.
Yeah, to start. When we at the gym.
The gym. Yes,
Yeah.
good old Planet Fitness.
Of
Shout out to
course.
Planet Fitness. Gym bros, right? Yes, we saw each other multiple times at the gym. And Luden, if I remember correctly, he came up to me. We would say hi, exchange highs. Because I used to teach Luden's cousin, Nadia. Shout out to Nadia if you're watching. And so I knew of Luden. But so just kind of the classic, like, what's up, bro? Gym.
Of course.
Excuse me, gym fist bump. But then one day you asked, hey, can we meet up just to grab some lunch sometime, just to talk and share life? And you knew I was a teacher and I worked in youth ministry, so I assumed you wanted my godly counsel, right? But it was good. And ever since then, when he was in high school, his senior year, we would meet on a weekly basis, pretty much every Monday morning, either at Chick-fil-A or Panera sometimes. And that was our spot, man. And we do all sorts of studies. But now, Luden has graduated high school back in on May or June or whenever high schoolers graduate. And he is studying at the University of South Florida. Bulls up, right?
Yeah, go Bulls.
Yeah, there you go. And Luden, what are you studying again? Tell our fine Thrive and Divers.
Of course. I'm studying exercise science with physical therapy pre-track. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then a little bit of music. I play the trumpet. Little bit of
Just
music.
a little bit. This
Just a little bit.
this man's a trumpet genius, man. He was in the marching band at his high school. He was in a jazz band just for fun, right? Did gigs and things.
Yeah, I gigged around,
Yeah, big time. And then also he was part of some sort of like I don't know band lingo, so I'm probably botching this, but you're part of like a club, if you will, over in the West Coast, and it was a big time, right?
Oh yeah, it was like a indoor music group, that we marched and competed like throughout the state, and then we went to Ohio for world championships. Placed third. Hey, it's pretty good.
Yeah, for world champions, that's good. And he also got an opportunity over the summer before he left for college to be a band instructor right out of high school for a couple of weeks over at Port St. Lucie, right?
Fundamentals instructor. So.
Fundamentals instructor.
Yeah. Not there yet.
Without the fundamentals, you don't have much of a band. So I say that's pretty a key position.
For sure.
Awesome, man. Make sure you're speaking up towards the mic. Make it like you gotta kiss it. Right? That was a little weird. Anyway, so Luden, you want to add anything about our relationship before we dive into our topic today?
It's been pretty good. It's been nice and humbling for me and very learning. A lot of education. I guess both sides. We've learned from each other.
Absolutely.
Every time we met, new topics, new conversations. Pretty good. Yeah,
so my relationship with Luden started out with kind of like it's going to be a discipleship type relationship, right? Like I'm going to mentor, pour into him. But as he mentioned, it was like more of a you got Timothy and Timothy and Paul relationship, where Paul's ministering to Timothy, and then you got a Paul and Barnabas relationship, which is when you're kind of iron sharpening iron with a peer, if you will. So I was anticipating this more being a Paul to Timothy. But I'd say there was a lot of Paul and Barnabas action happening. I was learning so much from Luden. It wasn't just me teaching him wisdom and application. He was sharing things that were fruitful and beneficial to my life. And I could tell because, dude, I was always refreshed after our Monday morning meetings, man. Sometimes when you minister to people, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, it's like, don't get me wrong, I love ministering to people, having one-on-one conversations with people and doing life with them. But sometimes it's like, ooh, that was exhausting. I'm trying to help them out and do things like that. But with Luden, it's like, man, I feel energized and ready to rock my day, right? So I personally appreciated our discipleship talks, and Luden never comes over to the East Coast every once in a while, so we get to keep those going. Obviously not as frequently as they used to be on a weekly basis, so once a month hang out type thing. So I really appreciate that, Luden. Well, with that being said, something that Luden and I did a lot during these Monday morning meetings is we went through books, right? We both are have a big heart and desire for learning. And I just introduced him to a lot of books that I read back when I was in college. And as I was rereading them with him, I'm like, man, these are so good. So some of the books we read were pretty small, but I think we covered like 3.5 books in a 6-month period.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the size of the one in the book. So it's very small. Don't get me wrong. It's like 75 pages, but still, I'm not a fast reader and definitely not a fast, systematic thinker to where I can like read and process. I'm not a fast processor. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so Luden and I, we read a couple books, and one of the books we read is a book by a guy named Phil Moser. Actually, 3 of the books we read were Phil Moser's books. He was a teacher of mine at the Word of Life Bible Institute. Shout out to Word of Life. Shout out to Phil Moser. And I love his books because they're so stinking practical, right? It always starts with biblical strategies for ... So he has biblical strategies for overcoming anger, for overcoming procrastination, for overcoming, anxiety, right? And the one that I want to talk about is he has one that says biblical strategies for overcoming self-pity. And I remember when I had read this, Luden, or first was about to read this during my freshman year of college, I was kind of like, what am I getting myself into? Self-pity. Like, what's that about? Why do I need strategies for overcoming self-pity? Isn't self-pity those who are just like crying all the time and can't get over themselves and always feels like the victim or whatever? I don't think the average person deals with self-pity, Luden, right? Is what I was thinking. But as I was reading the book, I'm like, oh, I do deal with self-pity, and it's a problem.
Very humbling.
It's very humbling, 100%. Even at reading it a second time with you, I'm like, man, I'm still struggling with self-pity, remnants of self-pity. So what we thought, I thought, man, this would be a great topic to talk about on Thrive and Dive, is let's talk about self-pity. What is it? How does it influence us? How does it get in our way? How can we overcome it? So I brought Luden on here to talk about, because he read the book with me, and we'll reference it a lot. So shout out to Phil Moser, give credit where credit is due. But then we'll share some of our own personal thoughts as well. And I love Phil Moser because he always uses scripture and uses strategies for helping overcome these different type of things through a biblical manner. So Luden, I want to go ahead and set the stage a little bit here, and I just want to read a couple things from Phil Moser, and then we can go ahead and get into some discussion. I'll prompt you with some questions, but a couple things right off the bat, right from the start of his book. He says this, Luden, on page 7.
Okay.
Self-pity is best defined as the preoccupation with yourself because your hopes, desires, or expectations have not been realized. The preoccupation with yourself, right? Self-pity is derived from a very, dare I say, narcissistic view of ourselves, where we're so self-absorbed, we're so into our feelings, we're so like, I'm the center of the universe type mentality.
Right. Everything revolves around us.
Yes. So that breeds self-pity, which we'll get to here in a second. So I just wanted to read that first definition, Luden. Any thoughts on that definition per se? I'm just going to jump. There's a couple things I just want to share. Keep going? Awesome. And he talks about this. Self-pity is sometimes mistaken for humility, but is actually a prideful response, even though it may not feel that way to us or appear that way to others. That wrecked me. I'm like, what? No way. Self-pity is mistaken for humility, right? It's like, oh, woe's me, man. Life is hard, I just don't have the strength, Luden, to get through my day. I'm always so tired. I'm overworked. And I'm not saying none of those things are valid, but it is a prideful response because it's constantly centered around us, and not other
unwanted
people.
Unwanted truth that you don't want to admit most of the times, and then when you do realize it, it's almost like you just don't want to admit to it, and then causes more self-pity within that. It causes like a spiral within it.
You don't take ownership or seek out to supersede your victimization, but instead you play the victim card, and we'll get to that more, and you constantly sulk in your misfortunate circumstances. I'm not saying the circumstances aren't valid, right? Sometimes life throws you lemons. You gotta make lemonade, right? It's tough, but there's a difference between accepting and lamenting over hardship, and you have that, Luden. I don't know if we'll share your story at all on this episode, but just in terms of like hardships, right? You
Right.
have more hardships than the average person, at least more than me for sure. And maybe it's warranted to maybe throw a pity party, which I'm not saying. There's a difference between throwing a pity party and grieving and lamenting. Grieving, lamenting, healthy. Lamenting is actually a spiritual discipline, but being so fixated on the circumstances and letting your feelings supersede the truths of God's word and the faith that you put in God is a dangerous place to be.
It is.
So he backs up that thought, though, of how self-pity is mistaken for humility when, in fact, it's a prideful response. He quotes C.S. Lewis, and I've heard this quotation multiple times. Maybe you guys have as well. It says, true humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less, right?
Yeah.
Stop thinking about yourself. If you really want to be a humble person, whatever you're thinking about, remove yourself from that equation. Think about other people. Think about the circumstances. Think about the Lord. Think about how you might be using it for his glory and for your betterment, right? But if you're constantly thinking about you, and your vision is just a self-portrait of you, then it's going to be an unfortunate way of seeing life. And then he references, and I want to get to in a second, Luden. He references several biblical characters. He references Cain from the Old Testament in Genesis. He references Moses, and he references Jonah. 3 Old Testament characters, right? And he says this. He says, a careful study of the biblical characters that I just mentioned, those 3, reveals several common features in their battles with self-pity. So he bullet points these things, and it's so good. This is what leads to their self-pity, Luden. He says, it followed a mountaintop experience, right? That's something to be aware of. When you have a mountaintop experience, that you're in a prime position to be a target of the enemy, first of all, but also to kind of indulge in self-pity and like you're vulnerable when you had a great success, right? Then it says it revealed a prideful desire for another's approval, right? When you're constantly seeking someone else's approval and you don't get that, self-pity is quick to follow. It intensified when they ran from responsibility, right? When they didn't take that ownership, self-pity came out. It grew in the discontented heart, right? If you're discontented in your situation, your circumstances, you're going to breed self-pity. It increased when they compared themselves to others, right? Oof, that's tough, right? You compare yourself to others, you don't match up, you're going to throw a pity party for yourself, right? It fueled various forms of anger. You see that a lot with Jonah. And then it led to despair. You actually see that in Elijah as well. That's a good biblical character that demonstrates self-pity. So anyway, that was a lot of just kind of a precursor, guys, to this topic, right? Humility is a preoccupation of yourself. It's a form of pride. And these bullet points I just mentioned can breed self-pity. So any thoughts on all of that, Luden? And then I want to kind of get your thoughts on some of the biblical characters that he talked about. If you can remember, we read this several months ago. But thoughts on self-pity, thoughts on what I just shared and read from this book.
I think you should go ahead with the questions before I answer all of them.
Oh, well, answer. I mean, I develop more questions based on just the comments you say. Yeah.
I mean, again, with the responsibilities that you mentioned before, how later in the book it actually mentions about assuming God's responsibilities over your own, because then you'll neglect your own, which also goes along with the think more of others and less of yourself, you know?
What do you mean by the assuming God's responsibility?
Like his will in what he wants. Like, for example, you helping others. I mean, it's kind of a lot. Can't really think of it.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in, Luden, to some of the people he talks about. How familiar are you with the Jonah account?
Yeah, Jonah and the whale.
The whale, the fish, technically.
Yeah,
but the whale, whatever. Tomato. I don't really care too much about that. But do you recall how he exhibited self-pity? If you don't, I can give you a refresher.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually the reason why I know so much about Jonah, one, I hear the story a lot, but I literally just did a message on Jonah at my youth group at Pathway Students, so it's pretty like fresh on the dome, right?
Yeah.
So Jonah, he was a prophet sent by the Lord to the city of Nineveh, and he was not a fan about going to Nineveh because he didn't like the Ninevites, because he knew, based on some prophecies of Amos and Hosea, some contemporaries of his, that Nineveh would eventually be the nation that conquers the northern kingdom of Israel, the Assyrians, right? And he knows how brutal the Assyrians are. They would fillet and skin their enemies alive, and hang them around the walls. Really, really barbaric, right? And he knows that, man, these people are going to take us over. I'm probably going to have some friends that are going to get filleted, right? And I don't want any chance of them repenting and being good standing with the Lord, because the Lord said he was going to bring destruction on the city, right? So he tries to run away because he doesn't want to see mercy come to the Assyrians, right? He goes to Tarshish, and he gets swallowed by the whale, fish, whatever.
Yeah.
Fish. I think the Bible says a fish. But I don't know Hebrew, so I don't know. But anyway, and then he finally goes to Nineveh. He shares a sermon, probably not super passionate because he doesn't care too much about the people. But regardless, a big revival happens, and everyone turns to the Lord. And Jonah, instead of being excited that he just saw one of the biggest revivals in history, he was ticked off. It's like, I can't believe you are going to save these people. I can't believe you're going to show grace and mercy to them, right? And so he throws a pity party, right? And so such a sad story, really. Jonah's such a sad character in the Bible. The book doesn't even end with like a good resolution. It's like God ends off saying, "Why are you so mad? There's so many people and cattle in the city," and then just stops. If you read the book, right? So what do you think of Jonah? What do you think of his situation? What could he have done to overcome the feelings of self-pity and things of that? It's just your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer per se. Yeah.
I think he was his thoughts or actions, him to himself, he thought were correct or right, in the right. Like, he didn't want to put others people's like lives on at risk, or he just didn't want to be the one at fault for what happens, right? So he decides to back away from God's will, right? And so his God's responsibilities, and so he kind of like gets afraid, and so he goes out, he leaves the area, and then kind of gets, I guess, God shows him his, like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving? Or why aren't you continuing what I should do? And then he gets caught in the whale fish.
Yeah, the whale fish. The whale fish.
The whale fish.
Like the shark whale. Yeah. Whale shark, is that a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's where he feels like after he sees that, what would you say, the event, like, what would you say?
The revival.
Yeah, the revival. After he sees that happen, he's feeling like, why would you do that to them, right? And so that's where that self-pity comes, where it doesn't necessarily mean self-pity. Self-pity can mean a lot of things, right? It can mean you feeling bad for yourself, or you thinking something else, like others shouldn't receive what you have received, let's say on a previous experience, right? Like, so if you were saved and then you see someone else that was, maybe committing a sin, and you're like, why should they receive that same treatment?
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where he felt that self-pity, and God, tells him, or God asks him, like, why are you feeling that way? And because everyone should receive that same opportunity as he did, knowing God and knowing his will and what he should have done, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that was one form of self-pity that he felt, where he felt they shouldn't have received that grace or mercy.
In a way, he was saying that they weren't worthy of the grace and mercy of God, which it's so funny, because I'm like, man, Jonah, we're all undeserving of the mercy and grace of God, right? So to think that we measure up more for that is a preoccupation of oneself, right? Like the definition has said. It's like, I don't care about the eternity of this people group because they hurt me, right? I'm hurt. I'm butthurt or whatever. And he could have legitimate reasons for being hurt. If someone filleted his friend or family, that's tough. I'm not saying that's not easy, but to be so victimized by that and to not let the grace and mercy of God burst through the seams of your heart, it's tough. And that's why hatred, bitterness, and loathing happens in a place of self-pity.
Almost like correlation between self-pity and selfishness,
Yeah.
Where he cares too much about what will happen to him instead of realizing the best for others.
Yeah, for sure. I want to share another example in the Bible. I want to get your thoughts on this, Luden. He didn't mention it in the book. At least I don't remember him mentioning in the book. But it came to mind when I read one of the conditions that can lead to self-pity is not being aware after a mountaintop experience, right? After a high point of your life, like a good point, like wow, the Lord really showed up, and then
Yeah.
next day it's kind of like spiritually bipolar. It's like, oh, life sucks, right? Like it happens to me sometimes when I'm like, I preach a great word, a fiery word, right? It's like, wow, the Lord just gave me an anointing, right? And after the word, I'm like, oh, life sucks. I just want to die. I'm not okay, maybe a little dramatic, but let's turn to the example though of actually someone saying that. So, and I don't know the exact reference. You guys can look it up. You guys can look it up. But I believe it's in either First or Second Kings. I want to say it's in First Kings. The nation of Israel is divided into two again. Northern kingdom is Israel, which is so confusing. Why would they not name it something different? I don't know if you know your Old Testament history very well, Luden, but you have the nation of Israel, but then when it splits under King Solomon, the northern nation, the northern kingdom retains the name of Israel, and the southern king gets called Judah, right?
Right.
And the annoying part is that Israel, northern kingdom, is not really relevant to the messianic lineage anymore, because Judah is the tribe by which the Messiah would come from. So it's just so confusing. But anyway, the northern kingdom eventually becomes the Samaritans after they intermingle with the Assyrians after the captivity. And that's the 10 tribes of the north and the 2 tribes of the south, which is Judah and I believe Benjamin. Anyway, little history lesson for you. But as the nation split under Solomon, different prophets go and preach to different kings from the different kingdoms, right? All the northern kings and the northern kingdom of Israel were wicked, evil, right? Southern kingdom had some good, righteous rulers like Josiah, Hezekiah, people like that. And the prophet's job, it was a tough job, was to basically tell the kings that they're in the wrong, they need to repent, lest the Lord turn His anger on them, right? So not a feel good message, right? Like you suck,
Right.
turn your life to the Lord, stop worshiping idols, type thing. Anyway, so Elijah is commanded by the Lord to confront King Ahab. And King Ahab is a wicked king, but even more so, his wife, Queen Jezebel, is wicked, like really, really wicked, times 100, right? And the whole showdown, I don't know if you know the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Do you know that story at all? If you don't,
Probably
no
if I
worries.
heard it again.
So basically, Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to a showdown, not a hoedown, showdown, where they both have an altar of a sacrifice, and whoever's God rains fire from the sky.
Oh yeah.
Will be the one true God,
Yeah,
right?
well, the one with the yeah. There was like a sacrifice of was it a cow or
Cow, cattle. Actually, I
cattle,
don't know.
I don't know.
Not pig. No, it's
Yeah,
not pig.
I remember
Pig
now.
would
I remember
be,
now.
Not,
Yeah.
not allowed.
And they were like trying to get their idol to
Rain down fire.
rain down fire, and it never happened. And then he started praying.
Elijah started praying.
Elijah
Yep.
started praying, and
Fire came from
yeah,
heaven.
fire.
Right, like a big physical manifestation of
And there
God's
was like
presence.
water over everything.
Exactly. Yeah, he just to show off. He's like, I'll drench this
Yeah.
sucker in water, and he'll still lick the fire. The fire will lick all the water up, right?
Yeah.
So a huge demonstration, right? Like imagine, you call out to God and a fireball comes from heaven. That's some good assurance of the power of God is on your side, right? That's cool. I'd love to see that happen. Obviously, we've got witness of it in the Bible, so we know it did happen. But it's the craziest thing. Okay, so even then, the prophets of Baal get killed, right? Because the king realizes, well, the guy who rained down fire is probably the God we should worship. Baal literally did nothing, so let's execute the prophets of Baal. But Jezebel, I guess, wasn't around for the showdown. I'll have to look at the text again, because when she finds out, she's ticked. She's like, what just happened? We just killed all of our prophets, and this fireball thing convinced everybody that the God of Elijah is real. It's like, oh my goodness, right? And she pretty much puts an execution order on Elijah. We need to bring him here and kill him, type thing. So Elijah flees, as one would if they had a bounty on their head. And after seeing such a great manifestation of God's power, Elijah has a weird case of depression. It's not weird. I mean, it happens, right? It's an example of how someone can go from such a great victory and then defeat so quick.
Right.
Because if you read the text, I'm paraphrasing here, but you can check it out in 1 Kings. He basically asks the Lord that he wants to die, right? I just can't do this, right?
Right.
I'm the only one left who believes in you, God. He says that, right? A very big preoccupation for oneself. He says, I am the only one left. Imagine, Luna, I said, I am the only Christian on this earth. I'm the only one left, God. Oh, so hard. And I'm not saying it's not hard. Maybe you might be the only one at your school as a Christian, or there's only a few of you. You might be. I mean, you go to a big public college at USF, right? You might feel like you're the only one who follows the Lord in some of your classes or friend groups and things like
Right.
that. But to be so self preoccupied with yourself and be like, man, I am the only one. Woe is me, right? And the Lord probably kind of smacks him up on the face a little bit. He's like, snap out of it. I have 7,000 people who still follow me, a remnant, right? And then he says, you need to go get some sleep and get some food to eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our professor, I remember, said that is sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do in life is get a good nap and get a good cheeseburger, right?
Yeah.
Get load up, man. So basically, though, all that was to say is that, man, sometimes we're so vulnerable after a great experience that we need to be careful. And here's maybe why. Here's a theory, Luden. I'm just thought of it as I'm sharing this. Maybe when something so good happens, we get a little prideful, consciously or
Okay.
subconsciously. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Like, let's just use my example of I preached a great word, or at least it felt like I preached a good word. All glory to God. But just being honest, there's times I'm like, man, I am good at what I do, right? I'll never say that to somebody, right?
Yeah.
Like, wow,
You'll think it. You'll think it.
but I'll think it, right?
Yeah.
And that's just as bad, right? And maybe the reason why after a high mountaintop experience we fall into great depression or self-pity is because we got too preoccupied with ourselves. We're like,
Right.
oh, I am good. But then the next day you realize maybe I'm not good, right? You get this doubt. And maybe someone said a comment that was negative about your performance, right? When you thought you nailed it, right? That really puts you down. But if you really cherish the moment, really want to give glory to God, you realize, man, God glorified himself, right? And then the next day it's like, oh, God's going to glorify himself through me again. But instead we're so preoccupied with ourselves, like, I nailed it. But what if I don't nail it today, right? And there's some spiritual components as well. I don't understand it, to be honest, but the enemy, can attack you after a good victory, right? And
Yeah.
try to remind you of all the ways you suck, right? So there's some different elements to that. But and I'm just curious, Luden, just off the top of your head, is there any times where you can remember, you had a big win, whether it was in music, whether it was in sports, whether it was in school, and then quickly it kind of turned on its head and you started being like depressed and having self-pity. So I don't know if you can think of any
Yeah, well,
examples.
Yeah, there's. I mean, it could go from something small in the day, like maybe, I don't know, or like for example, doing good on a test and then not doing good on the test.
Yeah, yeah.
But I know specifically when I went to a music like assessment that they do for those in like school, in grade school.
Yeah.
And you perform and they give you a rating out of 5. So it's like superior at the top, excellent, good, um fair, and then poor.
Yeah.
And I got a superior on my solo, right? And then I'm like, I guess what happens when you reach a high point in your life, like a high point in a certain situation or experience, you kind of push away the part where you could receive criticism. So now your pride is easily, or your I guess you could say, yeah, your pride is easily broken when receiving even just a tiny bit of criticism, like, oh, you could have done this better, or you could have done that. You did this pretty good, but you completely like ignore the positive comment and you take in like 100% of the negative, right? So it causes you to feel that self pity where you plummet down in emotions because you kind of now you focus your emotion on instead of more of like the reasoning, right, or the facts. So in my music, after I got the superior, I had another performance and I had to do it was like maybe a week later or maybe that same week at a concert, and I had a solo in that concert and I butchered the solo. And for maybe a week and a half I was down. I was like, I can't play my instrument. I can't do this. Like and then everyone's like, everyone has those days, right? But I feel like before I read this self-pity book, or maybe my junior year, I was a little, like, I'll admit, I was probably a little bit egotistical when it came to my playing, right? And but like throughout the books that we read and eventually when we got to this book, I realized, man, I was really feeling self-pity whenever I would perform or after a performance, because I would have all these good performances, and then I'll have a lot of bad, and I'd feel like I'd be like going up and down, up and down. But when I figured out my self pity, and I had to like push that away, and just take the criticism that I obtained, I was able to maintain a solid line. Maybe a little bit ups and downs. You know, you always have those, but you would still continue going up in a slow, consistent way, right? Instead of jumping up really high and then getting dropped back low, right? I feel like with focusing on your on the reasoning and the truths more than your feelings, like I would say maybe 70-30%, right? 70% being the truth and feelings, or truths, and then the feelings being 30%. You can realize a more consistent and positive outcome to your I don't know, your whatever you do good at, or whatever you focus on, whatever your job is, or whatever your hobbies are, like sports or music or school, and that.
No, right on, Luden. There's two things I want to highlight that you mentioned. Good stuff, bro. First one is self-pity sometimes is breeded or happens because we have selective memories, right?
Right.
We just kind of harp on and what's the word? Magnetize? No, magnify. Sorry, can't talk right now. We magnify the low points in our lives, and we just sulk on those things instead of stepping back and saying, whoa, okay, maybe the good outweighs the bad, right? And that's why I'm big on really, what's it called? Reflecting on the way God has worked in your life, right? Like, don't forget how he's worked in your past, because, again, we have that selective memory where we forget how he's worked, and we only think about the bad things, and then we sulk and get upset, get stressed and anxious, when in reality, no. God has been faithful. And secondly, I want to highlight something you mentioned about feelings and facts, you said?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so he mentioned a poem. I couldn't find it as you were talking, but he basically references a story through a poem of three guys that are walking on a wall: faith, facts, and feelings, right? And he's talking about that these three guys need to be in proper order, or else they're all going to fall off this wall or tightrope or
Right.
whatever, or a log on a lake like that you got to bounce on, whatever. It doesn't matter. You substitute whatever you want in your illustration. But he's basically said that facts needs to be at the front of the line, and faith is holding on to fact, and feelings are holding on to faith, right? So we need to put the facts, and he wanted to keep the alliteration, but facts is synonymous for the promises of God,
Right.
the Word of God, God revealing himself through Jesus in the Bible, special revelation, right? That needs to be at the front of our life, right? And then our faith, what we believe, needs to be grounded in the facts and the promises of God. We don't have blind faith, Luden. We have faith. Yeah, there's some things we can't see, right? Faith is not. We need to walk by faith and not by sight. But we have faith. It's not a willy-nilly faith. We have faith and assurance in things that are true, right? In God's word, in natural revelation, right? So we put our faith in those things, and then the feelings must be attached to the faith that are attached to the facts, right? Because feelings are very up and down. Feelings are not necessarily bad, right? God has given us feeling and emotions, but when we let our lives be dictated by how we feel, I don't know about you, I'm going to be all over the place, Luden, because I feel different things. I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel happy, and I can be, not to stereotype a girl, but, it feels like girls are so emotional. Shoot, guys are so emotional too,
Yeah.
right? Man, man, if I was dictated based on my feelings all the time, I would be a wreck, and people should be concerned about me, right? But no, I put my feelings under submission to the faith and the facts, right? That's why feelings doesn't lead the train. It's in the caboose, right? And because the facts will never change. God promises will never change. So we must cast our vision and cast our focus on the facts and put our faith in that, and the feelings will eventually start to submit to those two things. So that was good, Luden. I appreciate that. One final thought. This has been a good conversation, Luden, and I might be pushing a personal area that you don't want to talk about. If that's the case, just shut me down. But I want to talk about here as we close. So self-pity is a result of pride, right? You're thinking too much about yourself, preoccupation of yourself.
Right.
But I never want to accuse someone who is grieving of being practicing self-pity, right? That's like the most cold thing ever. It's like someone's going through a hard time. I'm like, stop, suck it up, buttercup. Stop demonstrating self-pity and stop playing the victim card, right? Because if I do that to someone who's legit grieving and trying to get through something, that's going to make me come across as very insensitive and not loving, right? So it's basically learning when to be firm and be like, dude, you are sulking. You are being victimized because of your own doing versus, all right, yeah, dude, I'm praying for you. How can I help you? So, right, it's like the difference between babying someone and actually like helping someone restore their emotional state, right?
Right.
So, what would you say, even from your own experience, because you've gone through some trauma? How did you or did you stop? How did you grieve without committing self pity in that in the trying
Yeah,
situation?
I'll explain.
Yeah.
So just a little background. My father got sick around November, and he passed away December 2nd, 2022. And I get like the situation in which I was in. I was grieving, you know, for my father's loss, right? And you kind of want to find that boundary of when you accuse someone of self-pity or grieving, and it's kind of hard to tell, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell when you're viewing out of the outside perspective, and it's really easy to do both,
Mm.
right? It's really easy to do both, and I've seen this a lot even at my school where there's upwards of 35,000 students, where it's really easy for them to just go and be like, oh, what's the matter with them, or why are they
Mm.
like that? It's really easy to judge, right?
Yeah. Right.
Or I've seen those that be like, oh, he's grieving, and but maybe they'll take it too far, and they'll be like, oh, it's okay, you can take maybe a week, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off, and then it becomes a cycle when someone that is grieving gets to a point where they're not being productive anymore,
Mm.
right? And there's no effort in pushing forward, so they get stuck in this spiral of not um of continuing life, right? They get stuck on this plateau, and even maybe a dip to
Mm.
where they may fall into depression, right?
Mm.
And I feel like in my situation, I I had, since that day, since December 2nd, since that day, I had the responsibility of taking care of my mom and taking care of my family. And honestly, I had to take responsibility of my dad, right? The responsibilities of him, of whatever I had to do in the house. Maybe I didn't do that before. Maybe I didn't take out the trash. Maybe I
Mm.
didn't clean the garage. I didn't clean the porch. I didn't mow the grass. I didn't do what I was told. But it hit me all at once like a huge wall,
Mm.
right? Like like a huge wall, and I like knocked myself into thinking like I can't stay like this.
Mm.
And I guess in my situation, I would say I'm pretty resilient, and
Mm.
I was able to like fall and get back up really fast.
Yeah.
But I understand, some people may not be able to um get back up as easily, but doesn't mean there's no effort, right?
Mm.
Doesn't mean they couldn't try. They can't try after their amount that they need to recover,
Yeah.
right? So now me and my mom, I mean my mom definitely took a longer time than me.
Yeah.
Like she recovered after maybe um 3 or 4 months.
Mm.
And I mean, it's not like a complete recovery. I don't think it'll ever be a complete recovery for either of us.
Yeah.
But definitely like majority of the recovery is between that 3 months, and she's now working good. She's back doing her daily routine. Now, if someone, it comes to a point when that when someone gets into self-pity, they're almost, the effort isn't there, as I mentioned before. The effort isn't there, so they're not trying anymore to push forward.
Mm.
And that's where they, I guess, giving up is the final resort to the problem.
Yeah.
And it's really different for everyone. You know, like you can't really say how much grieving time, like they get 2 months or that person gets a
Right.
week.
Right. It's
You
very
know,
contextual to the
right,
situation.
right.
Isn't
But
necessarily
it's
formal.
it's what is equal with everything, with everyone, is the ability to get back up,
Mm.
right? And that also includes those around you, right?
Mm.
So the people around you aid in that helping. I know a lot of my friends were there when I was, or my closest friends. So there was only like three of them or two of them,
Yeah.
and they were there for me at all times. But they weren't just like, I guess they weren't feeling pity over me either,
Mm.
because if they were just feeling pity over me, I would just be there crying, in my room by myself. But they were there to push me forward. They literally, like, when it happened, I called my friend and he was like, "All right, I'll be there in 10 minutes." So
Mm.
he was there in 10 minutes. Like, he was
Wow.
middle school, he ran out of school and he got there and he was like, "Let's go to the gym." He was like, "Let's go to the gym. Get up."
Mm.
And I was like, "All right." And so we went there, and it's like, they help you push, like those around you, family, friends, community, like your church community, a youth group. It really makes a difference, and it was very helpful throughout that time that I was in.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, Lou, and being so
course.
open about it. Yeah. So everyone grieves differently. Obviously, I'm speaking I'm speaking out of experience. I'm speaking out of my depth here because I've never been in a situation like that. So I'm gonna be very limited here. But really, the source of your strength needs to become the Lord, and obviously that can be through time, that can be through people, that can be through going to the gym, even, right? But the biggest thing is not to get so absorbed in your circumstances, Luden, right?
Right.
Would you agree that the way the rebound is to get your eyes off the circumstances and how it's your feelings, right?
Yeah.
And start to see life, see the big picture again, see how
Yeah.
Lord might be working through it, and things like that.
Yeah, I would say the biggest, if I wasn't a Christian, or if I didn't believe in the Lord, if my mom or my parents, my dad or my mom didn't bring me to church, or at home, like, read me the Bible, do a little, like, Bible study in our living room, or help me understand more, I'd probably not be where I am right now.
Mm.
I
Wow.
was able, the strength that I got after the whole thing happened definitely came from the Lord.
Wow.
And it's just, I had that faith. I never lost that faith, and a lot of people tend to be like, "Oh, like, I was at a high. I was at a high before my dad passed away, and then that hit me, and maybe those not with the Lord may be like, "Oh, that's it. Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. Like, I can't do anything." And having the Lord with me was really uplifting, and I just pushed forward. It honestly gave me strength to just keep going,
Wow.
and it was just really, really, really nice to have that support
Yeah.
under everything.
Well, praise God, man. I'm glad you're able
Yeah.
to fall back on the Lord like that and have Him help you through that time. That's awesome. It's a great testimony, Luden. Thank you for sharing it, and continue sharing that testimony
Yeah.
with others, especially people that are in similar situations that you were in, because you are a great example of how the Lord worked through that, and you're still working through it, right?
Right.
It's not done, like you said. And yeah, so that's kind of some thoughts, guys. Obviously, I want to stay in my lane. If there's a situation that requires like counseling and therapy, I'm not anti-counseling and therapy. I think that's a great thing. I would say that you need godly, biblical counseling and therapy. I don't think secular therapy and counseling really is going to do you that much good, in my personal opinion. But yeah, so the difference between grieving and self-pity, right? Good to grieve, good to lament, but let's not stay there, right?
Right.
Let's progress forward. You develop some resiliency. That's good. We need resiliency, right? And that's for speaking to those who haven't even been in a traumatic situation. One of the ways you can kind of break away from self-pity is to build that resiliency, right? Stop feeling like you're the victim. Stop feeling the woe is me. Build some grit. Build some resiliency. Those are going to be some character traits that are going to serve you so well, because life is hard, right? Life throws you curveballs. Don't really know why sometimes. The Lord's obviously working all things for the good of those who love Him, Romans 8:28. But sometimes it's really hard if you don't have that resiliency, and if you're so self-absorbed with yourself and your feelings, you're in your feelings all the time.
Yeah.
Then that's going to be a rough spot. It's going to be hard to get over self-pity. Well, Luden, that was a great conversation about self-pity. Any final thoughts before we close this out?
No.
Nope. Awesome, Luden. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
Thank you for
Thanks
sharing
for
your
having me on
story.
here.
Yeah, dude. Anytime, man. Love to
Yeah.
have you back for sure. Well, guys, this is Thrive and Dive. Thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace out, fam.